Little Nightmares is a really cool puzzle-solving platformer which has the yellow-clad Six here going through numerous perils with only her trusty lighter in hand. And today, we'll be taking a look at the any % speedrun category of this game, and see the strats, tricks, and glitches that have led to speedrunners being able to beat what is normally a 2 to 3 hour experience in just over half an hour. Let's check it out. Alright, so after starting up a new game on the main menu, time for the speedrun actually doesn't start until we get going in the game. So we actually want to skip the intro cutscene by simply pausing the game and reloading the previous checkpoint. Yeah, sorry, if you wanted to get a bit more of the game's lore, you ain't getting it here. Anyways, time for the speedrun officially starts as soon as the game loads in, and we start things off here as Six awakens in this suitcase. As soon as we're able to move, we'll want to start going to the right, and while we're doing that, now is a good time to go over stamina management, which ends up being a pretty important aspect of this game for speedrunning it. So Little Nightmares gives the player the ability to sprint, and like in many games, this can only be done for a certain amount of time before needing to take a break. And unfortunately here, there's no meter or anything indicating Six's stamina, and you'll only start to see her slow down and become more sluggish when your stamina does start to run low. There's also sprint jumping, which allows Six to move really fast in any direction, but each jump comes at the cost of a bunch of stamina, so managing these jumps is really important to maximize speed while also not overdoing it to run out of stamina. And if we want to get to the really nitty-gritty details, once you drop under 40% stamina, you'll actually enter a fatigued state, and once under 10%, an exhausted state, with each state causing Six to control slower and more sluggish. And if you do drop under 40%, you don't fully recover movement unless you wait until you get back up to 100% stamina. That said, you can hold the sprint button all you want in the game's many vent segments, as there, although you still do move faster, fast crouch walking doesn't actually use your stamina. And another good tip is to let go of the run button whenever Six goes through doors or climb stuff, as those actions aren't sped up with the run button, and it's a good time to rest up the stamina. Anyways, with that stamina lecture out of the way, let's get back to the run. After getting through the first vent section of the game, we get a nice zoom out here as Six runs up these stairs. There are many cool shots like this throughout the game that really just exemplify how nice this game can look. Then after sliding under these planks and jumping onto and off of this bed to get into this window, we enter this room where we can see a dude just hanging out, and here we actually get to do the first of many tricks for the speedrun. So normally here, you have to pull this chair along close enough to the door so you can then climb on it and jump towards the door handle to open it up. But we're speedrunning, so we can just run onto this raised up plank in the back right of the room here, and if you jump off at the right spot, you'll actually get enough height to still grab the handle and open up the door much faster. In the next room, we can use up the rest of our stamina, as after opening up this fridge, we got some climbing to do. And then after making our way to the right, as we dodge some goopy leech things that rain down on us from above, we can pull this switch to open the next set of doors, jump across this gap, and then pull off this plank to get into the next room. Now, unfortunately, we don't stay up here too long, as some floorboards break right under our feet, and this drops us down into the dark room below, where after flicking on our lighter, we can see that we are surrounded by a whole bunch of goopy leeches. Then, after making it out of that room alive, we climb upwards for a while, and eventually we get to this crank, where turning it causes a door to open on the other side of the room, but letting it go will cause it to close up again, so we want to open it enough to leave enough time for us to jump across and make it under before it closes. And then, as soon as we see this loading icon pop up on the bottom right of the screen that indicates that we tripped the next autosave trigger point, we can actually do some checkpoint abuse here, as if we pause and reload the previous checkpoint, this will not only put us further into the next room, but it will also fully recover our stamina so we can hit the ground running into the next room, where having that extra stamina is nice, as it's a really long room, so a few extra sprint jumps can save a few more seconds here too. Oh yeah, here we also get introduced to the first boss of the game that we get to encounter, the janitor, as we climb up this rope made up of tied together linens. Next, we can get to this bathroom and jump off the toilet paper crate here to pull a switch which cuts the power, and this lets us bypass these bars that normally will fry Six if the power is on. The power is only cut for a limited time, but if you sprint and jump across this next room enough, you should have no problem getting through the next normally electrified set of bars as well. Now in this next corridor, we can do another cool little trick. By picking up one of these blocks here and placing it onto this ledge in the right spot, by quickly grabbing the block from the edge here and almost immediately crouching for a few frames, this can actually zip us right to the middle, effectively skipping the first cycle of the eye light that can kill 6. Although not only is this trick visually interesting and can save some extra seconds, it can be a bit tough to pull off, and personally, I'm not nearly consistent with this trick enough to do it myself in an actual speedrun scenario. In any case, we can now climb up these boxes and cages to get to the next room where we can finally get nice and close to the janitor. But the interaction is cut short as we can simply sprint and jump through this room to avoid the janitor altogether, at least for now. Then, after crawling through another vent, we actually get to the first hunger section of the run. Now, normally here, there are 3 trigger points which will cause 6 to go through a hunger animation, and each of these wastes about 5 seconds as you can't really move around during them. Thankfully though, there's a rather easy trick you can do to bypass these triggers. All you have to do is just cause 6 to trip over where the trigger line is. For example, the first trigger line is about here, and if we trip over it in the right spot, although the music will still change as if the hunger animation was playing, we actually still get to keep control of 6 to keep moving forward. There are quite a few of these trigger points throughout the game, so you just kinda have to memorize where they are and remember to trip 6 at each one. Well, except for the next one, as this one can be skipped by jumping off of this panel here and then grabbing onto the wall in the background for a bit. And although the third and last hunger trigger of this area can be skipped, we actually don't want to skip it, as this one results in a cutscene that's necessary to progress in the game. Anyways, in this final hunger animation, the character in the background tosses us some grub to munch on, and with 6's stomach temporarily refilled, we can climb out of this area, run through a shower room to now get to what I like to call the cage room. The next door is electrified, so we need to find a way to turn off the power, so we head up these cages and crates to get to a chain that we can climb to get up even higher. The switch up here unfortunately doesn't shut the power off, but instead will cause the chain to get pulled up, and now we need to use it to get across the room here, so we have to pull this lever to the right to first bring the chain towards us, and then as soon as it gets to the rightmost position, we'll want to immediately switch it back to the left to move the chain accordingly. We can then ride this chain across, and then pull out and climb onto these filing cabinets to then finally jump onto this switch that does actually kill the power. And here is where we actually get to do the first major skip of the speedrun that saves a bunch of time. Now normally, after killing the power, you have to go through the bars on the left, push down this counterweight block to bring up this rope, and after a long trip back down and run through the shower room once again that's now full of slugs, you can make your way back to the door that we have to get through. But thankfully, we can skip all of this by aiming a jump to the right here in a specific spot which doesn't end up killing 6, from which we can then jump down the crates to get where we need to go much faster. After this, we have another eye spotlight to dodge, and thankfully this one's pretty easy as we can just go closer to the back wall to avoid it, and after jumping across this bridge that starts to pull apart, we actually escape this prison, and this brings us to the end of the first chapter in only a handful of minutes. We now start off Chapter 2 with an absolute marathon of stair running, which ultimately leads us to the janitor's bedroom, and here we can do another little trick. Instead of pulling the switch to bring out the janitor's bed and climbing up a bunch of furniture to reach the key that we need, we can simply just get onto this toilet, jump onto this sink, and then after running to the right, if you jump at the exact moment that 6 exits the forced crouch here, you can angle a jump to make it onto the handles of the drawers here to then jump up to the key a bit faster. Then, with this key in hand, we can lug it over into the back room to unlock the next door, and then after grabbing and chucking the cymbal monkey, we can call an elevator and then use it to take us down several floors to a maintenance corridor, where we get to do our second wave of hunger skips. The first trigger is where the light ends near the start, the second just after 6 reappears behind the pipe in the foreground here, and then the last one is around this line near the start of the light at the end of the room. I guess that piece of bread from earlier wasn't enough, as in our very hungry state, we can slowly walk over to this piece of meat found in this cage that's definitely not a trap. Oh, it was a trap. Who could have seen that coming? We then unfortunately have an almost 30-second cutscene that we have to sit through where we can see the janitor hauling another unfortunate fella away. But after we come to, we can bonk against the sides of our cage to knock it down and escape. Then we can pull this cage to the right to be able to reach this handle that opens up the next door. And after swinging into the next room and avoiding the door closing back on us, we can climb up the gate behind us to make our way to the janitor's packing room. Now this part can be a bit tricky, but after running off the cloth on the floor, if you sprint jump 4 times, then briefly walk before sprint jumping a 5th time, if you're fast enough at getting into the next room through this gap, you can once again avoid the janitor as he won't follow you into the next room, giving you ample time to pick up the crank here, plop it into the slot, and turn it to open up the hatch to the next area. And in this vent section, we get a brief foreshadowing to the next boss, or I guess mini-boss, as we don't really see it for too long. Well, we don't actually really see it at all, as the shoe monster just basically swims underneath a sea of shoes down here trying to catch us. And yeah, here we basically just need to go from suitcase to avoid the shoe monster. And a good tip here is to not hold the run button while wading through the shoes, as it doesn't even speed you up at all, so no need to waste your stamina. And after getting to this last suitcase, we're done here, and that's the last we'll actually ever see of the shoe monster. There's not a lot of downtime from the stress here though, as almost immediately we're thrown into a chase sequence as the janitor closes in on 6. And then we actually get back onto the elevator that we took before, and if we stand near the bottom right of it, thankfully since the janitor can't see very well due to the simple fact of him not having any eyes, we can ride it up with him, and thankfully there are a few gnomes hiding in here that bait him away from us. The next room has a small skip we can do by simply jumping right onto the cymbal monkey, which will let us drop down below without having to waste time pushing this box out of the way. We don't stay down here long though, as after climbing back up, we can sneak past the janitor once again, go through his weird doll collection, and then climb our way up this dresser, and finally go through another vent crawl, which drops us into the start of a bunch of clock rooms that the janitor has a big problem with. I guess them messing around with his sense of hearing and all. The janitor then drops down in this next room where we have to quickly grab a shoe to throw onto the button here to open up the adjacent door, run through another clock hallway, which then brings us to a library room where we have to climb a bookshelf, jump onto a piano to then climb another bookshelf. Once at the top, surprise surprise, the janitor is there waiting for us, but thankfully we can quickly jump past him and then sneak our way through this next room by sliding under a few of the shelves here. Then after climbing this very conveniently placed stack of books, we drop into this room where, after turning on the TV to play some epic YouTube videos to distract the janitor, we can grab this crank here and wait by the door for the janitor to enter. And after he comes in and takes a few steps, we can sneak right past him and basically take the same path back that we used to get here to get back to the slot we need to put the crank in. And cranking this actually raises up the piano from before, that we can now use to jump back across to get through this window here. After plopping out, we have to pull this cart across this room, and then do a switcheroo in the middle to avoid the steam here that can kill 6, and after getting the cart across, we can use it to grab onto the door handle here. It's important to hold onto the handle for a bit here though, as if you let go too soon, you'll actually get yeeted into the abyss below, and I'd be lying if I said that this didn't mess me up at least a few times. Anyways, soon we find ourselves in a maintenance area, and here, the janitor will try to bamboozle you through one of the cracks in the wall. Now normally you have to wait a bit to proceed, but if you remember that this is coming, you can actually jump towards the arm at a certain angle, and doing so you can completely skip through the janitor's grab. The janitor doesn't give up though, as he'll quickly bust into the next room, but thankfully here we can do one of my favorite tricks of the speedrun. If you stand around this plank here and jump away from the janitor just as the door closes behind him, you can slip away from his grab, which causes him to be stunned for a bit. And after this, you can quickly sprint jump across this hall to get to the next room much faster, and this in turn gives you a head start at pulling out one of the cage bars, before then pulling out the other one, and this results in a really fast way of dispatching the janitor, as doing this causes the door to slam down, cutting off both of the janitor's lanky ass arms, putting him out of commission for the rest of the game, and just like that, we are actually done the second chapter. Next, of course, we have the third chapter, which mostly takes place in the kitchen area, and honestly, this is, I think, the most stressful part of the speedrun. We start things out in Big Shocker, yet another vent crawl, and after making our way up this ladder, we can grab onto one of the hooks and ride it across this big gap, where in the background we can see one of the two chef twins having a smoke break, and these will be the main antagonists of this chapter. Eventually, once we drop onto the pile of, I guess, bodies that the janitor would pack up, we have another set of hunger triggers to skip. The first one here is thankfully probably the easiest one to skip in this run, as by walking over to just behind this body bag here, by simply just crouch walking to the right, we can actually walk just under the trigger point here. The second and final hunger trigger in this area is in this next room towards the end of the pile of bags in the back. And then finally, we just make our way over to this poor little mouse fella that got caught in this trap, and unfortunately it ends up being dinner for 6 here. After that nutritious meal, we jump our way over a bunch of boxes full of body bags, push this lid to make a ramp, and after wheeling this cart to jump into this next window, we finally get to the main kitchen area. And here, the speedrun kinda splits into two paths, as there's the easier and slower path, and then a more difficult and more risky trick that can save us a considerable amount of time. First here, I'll go over the easier stuff, and then the more riskier trick after. So here, we'll want to crouch or slide through this hole in the wall, and then quickly sprint jump through this room, and if you move through it fast enough, you can actually bypass the chef here without alerting him. And this leaves the next room to be a breeze, as you can just waltz over to the cabinet in the back without the chef chasing you around, as we see that we need to find a key to open up the next area. After climbing up, we can jump onto the beams above here and walk across back to the other side. It can be quite easy to fall off here if you play with a controller, so I actually like to switch to using a keyboard here, as although the perspective looks a bit angled, pressing the S and A keys to go down and left respectively here will basically ensure that you move 6 in a straight line. And once we get to the other side and climb up the cages with fish that have been there for who knows how long, we can sprint on over to the twins' bedroom where we can find the other chef still sleeping. We need to grab this key up here though, and unfortunately, once it drops, it will actually awaken the chef, so we gotta quickly grab it and haul it as fast as we can back to this elevator. Depending on how the key bounces when it drops, this part can be quite unforgiving with how fast the chef will chase you. But if you do manage to escape down the elevator, we can take the key under this table and then go right through this hole in the wall this time, and if you do it right, you'll once again avoid detection by the other chef here, and this will result in a less stressful run to unlock the door to the next area. Now those are the easier strats for this section, but if you're feeling like taking on more risk, when starting in this area you'll actually want to get the chef's attention so he'll start chasing you around. You'll then want to bait him to try grabbing you under this table, and after he starts, taking the lower stairs to the right here will actually force him to take the path further in the background, and if you position 6 properly on the left here, move right once the chef makes his way up the stairs, and then time a slide at just the right time and angle, after failing to grab 6, the chef will turn a bit, and his belly will actually push 6 right through the wall, allowing you to clip into the next room. And this, of course, saves a ton of time that you'd otherwise lose doing the stuff that we went over earlier. But yeah, I find this trick incredibly precise and risky. I was able to pull it off numerous times, sure, but personally, I don't think I'd ever have the stomach to actually try doing this in a run myself, as a very small timing or placement error can end up resulting in a big time sink if the trick fails and the chef ends up grabbing 6. Whichever path you take though, they'll both end up taking you to this next room that then leads to a sausage making room. But first, we need some meat, so we have to take this dumbwaiter up to this refrigerated room. In this room, we gotta get 2 more meat chunks of unknown origin to the trapdoor here. One is on the table right by the dumbwaiter, and then the other we have to climb this shelf and jump across some hooks to pull it down. Once all 3 meat chunks are in place, we can head back down, jump onto the table to reach this handle to open up the trapdoor above, and once the meat falls in place, we can turn this crank to grind it up and produce some nice sausage links that we can then grab onto to swing our way to the next vent crawl. Now this vent brings us to another refrigerated area, and then we get over to this elevator room where the speedrun splits once again like it did before. Now the safer strats start with us giving the chef a little juke to quickly get onto the elevator, and then once up we can hide in this vent as the chef chases us up here. Then after the chef starts moving to the left, we can sneak right by him, climb onto the table, and try to grab the key. He can be a bit tough to avoid, but you can try baiting him under the table here, and that should clear you enough time to make it back onto the elevator to take it down. And thankfully, even if you do get caught here, the checkpoint isn't too far back, so you can try again pretty easily. On the other hand though, the slightly more risky trick we can do back down here is another belly clip, similar to the previous one. After the chef starts chasing you, you can sprint on over to the door on the right, and once again dodge his grab with a well-timed slide. And if you do it at the right time and place, the chef's belly will push you on into the next room, and then he'll keep trying to chase you even though he's blocked by the door. Now, surprisingly enough, I find this belly clip to be much more consistent than the previous one. I don't know if it's just having more room here or something else, but yeah, this trick I find consistent enough at my skill level that I think it's worth trying in a speedrun, as it'll save all the time of having to take the elevator up and such. This will also give you more time to do this next trick in this room, as if you don't do the belly clip here, you'll only have one try before the chef catches up to you. So normally, you have to open up this garbage chute to take it down to avoid the chef. But if you run towards this pillow-looking thing and jump towards it and off of it at the right spot, this can actually give you enough height to reach this door handle to quickly make it into the next room. And here, we actually get to do a trick that, besides maybe the first belly clip, probably saves the most time in the speedrun. So after climbing up these pots and dishes on the shelf here, we can jump back above the door that we just came in through, and then go back and jump onto these shelves here. Then, while standing against the wall here, just under where the hooks pass by above, we'll actually want to time a jump and subsequent grab onto a hook at just the right time, and if you do, you'll actually clip right through this wall while still hanging on to the hook. It can be quite tricky to nail the timing of this, and if you miss it, at best you'll just have to try again, but there's also a non-zero chance that you'll bonk off the wall, which will cause you to drop back down to the floor below, and this can be devastating in a speedrun, as the nearest checkpoint would be in the bottom of the garbage chute below. Anyways, if you do manage to clip through here, the room will soon default to a low level of detail state, as we soon get teleported way across the room, as by holding onto the hooks, since I guess they get teleported to be reused all the way over here, so did we. And we can then let go of the hook, make our way back in bounds, and finish up the last chunk of the chef chase sequence here to grab onto another hook that takes us across another large gap. Doing this hook warp saves us a lot of time that would otherwise be wasted sneaking around the twins here, so it's definitely worth doing, as it's not all too difficult, and hey, it looks really cool to pull off too. Then after we make our way across, we can crawl through this crack, run across this massive pipe, and then after a lengthy ladder climb, we get blinded by light as we actually make it outside this ship or island or whatever it is that we're on, called the Maw. And here we have a long climb up as we get a really nice visual of the outside world, and we see some new guests boarding the Maw from their own transport ship. Although this part is super cool to see the first few times, this novelty wears off pretty quickly when speedrunning this game, as it ends up being like 45 seconds of just climbing upwards. Anyways, eventually we make it to the top hole here and go back into the Maw, where after walking along this beam and getting a better look at the new guests below, we finally get to the end of the third chapter. Chapter number 4 starts us off getting through this pipe that takes us to, I guess, an entrance that the newly arrived guests are going into. And after climbing up to the top here, we can jump across these hanging light fixtures to then enter the guest eating area that's absolutely filled with pies, fish, and meat likely made up of the bagged up bodies we saw in the earlier chapters. And here we basically just want to keep running to the right to escape the guests, who start foaming at the mouth at the mere sight of 6, and I guess we taste good enough for them to warrant breaking down their tables to start waddling after us. We then climb onto this table and up this stack of bowls to make a jump onto this lantern. Now normally you'd probably swing a few times here, but if you just hold right long enough, if you jump at the right time, you can actually use the hitbox of the guest below you to help you along to the next ledge. It may look a bit scary, but honestly, this jump is pretty easy to do. Now in the next room, there's a small trick that you can try where by jumping towards these sausages here and then grabbing at just the right time, you can actually propel 6 right up onto the bar above to skip having to run to the right and then back. But I find this trick pretty hard to do personally, and I don't think I was ever able to pull this one off myself in an actual speedrun scenario. Anyways, getting to the end here, we can then jump across, climb the wall, make our way to the back section, avoid some more guests, and then use another lantern to swing across the gap here. Now in this next room, we can do another neat little trick. After sprint jumping a few times to get to this table here, after passing the guest that tries to grab us, we can start moving down a bit to completely dodge his grab, giving us ample time to squeeze through the next gap. And then in the next room, we have an elevator, where we get a surprise visit from none other than one of the chef twins. And here, by standing just to the right of the elevator as he comes down, if you move to the left, as soon as the chef starts moving, you can actually sneak right by him and escape up the elevator. And now we got another chase sequence, and here you'll want to keep doing sprint jumps as much as you can, as there's actually some triggers along the way that will instantly refill your stamina. And yeah, you just basically keep sprint jumping away from the mob of guests as their stampede causes furniture to collapse and such, before finally jumping onto yet another lantern to swing your way to safety. And then here in the next room with the wave artwork in the background, we actually have our last set of hunger trigger lines to skip. The first one is around this gap in the floorboards here, the second around this one, and then the final one is around this gap here in the next room, and just like that, congratulations! That's all of the hunger skips in Little Nightmares. This finally ends with us getting to the sausage in the middle of the room here. Oh, 6 just ate the gnome instead. Okay then. And now for the final stretch of this chapter, we actually have one last trick that's quite tough to pull off. For this, it's best to switch to using a keyboard, as we'll need precise right movement to run along the back edge of the wall here, and then around this point you'll want to jump off while holding the right and down keys to then grab onto the ladder on the right here. If all done correctly, you'll start climbing high enough on this ladder that if you sprint jump across the next room, you'll actually get into the elevator with the lady just in time before it closes.
Hello!
Doing this skips having to go and grab an object to then throw it onto the button to call the elevator back, saving about 10 or so seconds. Unfortunately, this is another one of those tricks that falls under the "I've never been able to pull it off in a speedrun scenario" bucket for me. Anyways, getting onto the elevator wraps up the 4th chapter, and with the 5th and final chapter being rather short, the end of the speedrun is now on the horizon. And unfortunately, there aren't really any cool speedrun tricks or anything in this final chapter, as we basically just sprint our way up to where the lady is brushing her hair in front of a broken mirror, where we have to crouch walk our way across here, as even the sound of walking normally will cause her to bamboozle 6. And then in her room, we have to break open this vase to grab the key inside, carry it all the way back to this locked door here, go through a rather short little chase sequence, do some more running, and then pull a plank off this door to obtain an unbroken mirror, which then lets us start what is probably the most anticlimactic final boss battle I have ever played in a game. Here, some lights will shine down, indicating where you need to go, and then basically you just have to aim the mirror at the lady whenever she tries to get close to you. And I guess she hates the light or just looking at herself so much that this actually damages her. You have to beam her like this a total of 6 times in 4 different locations, but thankfully enough, the lights always shine in the same places in the same order, so by your second time doing this boss fight, it'll be an absolute walk in the park. And after the 6th and final beam, the lady is down for the count, and that is time for the speedrun. The game does keep going, for a while actually, as we end up turning the lady here into a midnight snack, and then sucking the life force out of a bunch of the guests in this hall here. But thankfully, the speedrun community has agreed to cut this part of the game out of the speedrun, as it's incredibly long and doesn't really add anything to the run. So there you have it. With these tricks, in only a few days of running this game myself, I was able to bring my best time to 46 minutes and 51 seconds, which would currently put me around a not so impressive 140th on the leaderboards. But hey, this is like a quarter of the 3 hours that it took me to beat this game on my first playthrough a month prior, so I'll take it as a win. And of course, with less deaths and mistakes, and being more comfortable with the riskier strats, top runners of this game have been able to shave down the world record time to just over half an hour, with the world record speedrun, as of the making of this video, being held by Sai Moen with a load removed time of 32 minutes and 57 seconds. Now, as a newcomer to this series myself, I've really enjoyed this game, and although parts of the speedrun were incredibly frustrating for me, I'm definitely interested in exploring the series some more. So if you're interested in me checking out the speedruns for this game's DLC or its sequel, be sure to let me know. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out some of the other speedruns that I've covered, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for running with me today, and I will see you in a bit.